Welcome to the Explainer. If you've ever watched a child grow and thought, how is their mind actually wiring itself right now? Well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're decoding the ultimate blueprint of the human mind. We're going to strip away all that dense academic jargon and look at the absolute foundational theories of child development. So, whether you're an aspiring teacher, a parent, or just somebody who's completely fascinated by human psychology, we're making these massive concepts crystal clear.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the cognitive map we're following today. First, growth versus development. Then, Piaget's cognitive blueprint. Third, Kohlberg's moral compass. Fourth, Erikson's psychosocial journey. And finally, the forces that shape us. Let's get right to it. Section 1. Growth versus development.
So, to start, we really need to clear up a massive everyday misconception right off the bat. People use these two words interchangeably all the time, right? But scientifically, they are very different animals. Growth is quantitative. It's totally measurable. We're talking about your height increasing, your weight changing, your organs physically getting larger. And crucially, it stops. Once you hit late adolescence, you generally stop growing taller. But development, that is qualitative. It's this continuous, lifelong journey, literally from the womb to the tomb. It's how you acquire language, how you learn to manage your emotions, how your social skills refine over decades. Development never stops. There's always room for improvement right until the very end of life.
Section 2. Piaget's cognitive blueprint. Now that we've got our foundational terms set, let's look at how we actually learn to process the world. Jean Piaget was a Swiss biologist turned child psychologist, and he actually studied his own kids to build a developmental theory so incredibly accurate that it still forms the absolute bedrock of education today. To understand his blueprint, you've got to grasp one single core concept: schema. Think of a schema as your mind's internal filing cabinet. It's how you mentally organize the entire world. For instance, your schema for a festival might be a massive file folder packed with memories of specific foods, loud music, colors, and visiting guests. Your schema for studying might just be a file full of highlighters and sticky notes. And even a newborn has innate schemas, like a sucking schema. If a toy or a thumb touches their lips, they just automatically suck on it. As we grow, those filing cabinets just get massive. But what happens when we experience something totally new? This brilliantly illustrates how we actually learn. Basically, we have two choices: assimilation or accommodation. Assimilation is when you take new information and just try to force it into an old file folder. Accommodation, on the other hand, is when you realize, hey, the old file doesn't work here. So you upgrade your files or create a brand new one so you can correctly understand the new situation. Let me give you a pretty hilarious real-world example from our sources to really anchor this idea. Imagine a young child who has a mental file, a schema for a scary ghost. Maybe they picture someone dressed as Bloody Mary with heavy white face powder. Well, one day, the child sees a TikToker out in public wearing incredibly heavy, pale makeup for a dance tutorial. The child points and screams, "Ghost! Bloody Mary!" Now, that is assimilation. The child took new data, the TikToker, and shoved it into an old, incorrect file. But then the mother calmly explains that no, this isn't a ghost, it's a dancer wearing theatrical makeup. The child processes this, updates their mental filing cabinet, and creates a brand new schema for performers with makeup. That moment of correct learning, that is accommodation. PSA realized we basically build these files across 4 distinct stepping stones. First up, in the sensory motor stage from birth to 2, infants literally learn through their senses and reflexes, touching, tasting, and grabbing everything in sight. Next is the pre-operational stage, up to age 7. Here, kids engage heavily in pretend play, like using a wooden block as a cell phone, but they really struggle to see things from other people's perspectives. Then, in the concrete operational stage, around 7 to 11, logical thinking finally kicks in. They can classify objects and solve basic math in their heads. And finally, formal operational, from age 11 onwards, unlocks abstract thinking. This is the stage where teenagers can finally ponder complex, hypothetical concepts like justice, love, or what it would really be like to be an astronaut.
Section 3. Kohlberg's moral compass. Let's move to the next theory and see how this all builds. We know how the brain organizes facts, but how exactly does it judge right from wrong? Well, this brings us to Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. The interesting thing here is that Kohlberg didn't actually care if you followed the rules. He cared about why you followed them. So, let's pose a dilemma right out of the source material. Imagine a man whose mother is desperately ill. He urgently needs medicine to save her life, but he has absolutely no money. So he robs a bank to buy the medicine. Was he right or wrong? Kohlberg found that how you answer this question depends entirely on your current stage of moral development.
Kohlberg tracked this across a pretty clear timeline. At the pre-conventional level, which goes up to about 10 years old, morality is really just about avoiding punishment. A kid doesn't steal a cookie simply because they're terrified of being grounded. Then, at the conventional level, roughly ages 10 to 13, morality shifts. It becomes all about gaining social approval and strictly following societal rules. You don't run a red light because it's against the law, and society frowns upon it. Simple as that. But the final stage, post-conventional, is where it gets really fascinating. Here, individuals realize that laws are not absolute. Morality is guided by profound, universal human rights. In this stage, a person might break a law or participate in a protest, like those advocating for equal rights, because they genuinely believe a universal ethical principle outweighs a societal rule. They might say robbing that bank was morally justified, because human life is inherently more valuable than property laws. Section 4. Erikson's psychosocial journey. So, we have the logic and we have the morals. Now let's look at social identity. Erik Erikson believed that our personality doesn't just stop developing in childhood. It's shaped over our entire lifetime by how we interact with society. He beautifully organized a lifetime of struggle into 8 stages. Now, what's really interesting about this is that at each stage we face a psychosocial crisis. Basically, a battle between 2 opposing emotional states. If you win the battle, you unlock a specific lifelong core strength. For example, in infancy, a baby cries. If parents provide comfort, the baby learns trust. If ignored, they learn mistrust. Winning this first battle unlocks the lifelong strength of hope. Fast forward to young adulthood, the battle is intimacy versus isolation. Finding deep connections there unlocks the strength of love. And in late adulthood, looking back on a life well lived brings integrity, which unlocks the ultimate strength of wisdom. Let's ground this dense framework in everyday reality for a second. Look at the early childhood stage, autonomy versus self-doubt. Just imagine a toddler who fiercely wants to dress themselves, and they proudly put on their shoes, but, of course, they are completely mismatched. Now, if the parents laugh it off and praise the child's independent effort, that child develops autonomy and the willpower to try new things. But if the parents are over-controlling, scold the child, and immediately fix the shoes for them, the child feels ashamed. They effectively failed that stage's crisis, developing a lingering sense of self-doubt. Section 5. Forces that shape us. We've built the internal blueprint, but obviously no mind develops in a vacuum. It is the classic dance of nature versus nurture. Hereditary deals with the genetic traits passed down from your parents, your physical attributes, health vulnerabilities, and even your baseline intellectual potential. But environment, that's the external reality you're dropped into. It dictates the language you learn, the culture you adopt, the socioeconomic resources available to you, and your educational opportunities, like whether you grow up in a rural village versus a bustling tech hub. Both of these forces dynamically dictate exactly how effectively you move through Piaget and Erikson stages. And within that environment, literally nothing hits closer to home than parenting styles. Our sources outline 4 distinct types. You've got authoritarian parents who are strict and heavily punishment-driven. Then there are permissive parents. They're incredibly warm but very lenient, basically letting kids run the show without boundaries. Neglectful parents are entirely detached and uninvolved. But the ideal, the one aspiring teachers and caregivers really need to note, is the authoritative style. It's perfectly balanced. It sets clear, firm rules, but pairs them with deep emotional warmth, respect, and support, which ultimately fosters the absolute highest levels of child self-esteem. Finally, we absolutely cannot ignore the modern environment, media. Today, a child's environment isn't just their neighborhood, it is the entire internet. And it's a profound double-edged sword. On one hand, it offers unprecedented global learning, creative exposure, and connection to incredibly diverse cultures. But on the other hand, it introduces immense risks that directly impact mental development, everything from cyberbullying to the relentless pressure of unrealistic, heavily edited beauty standards that can severely disrupt a teenager's search for identity. And that brings us right back full circle. We've decoded the massive mechanisms of growth, cognition, morality, and identity. But before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a direct question. Look back at your own blueprint. Based on what we covered today, which stage of Erikson's psychosocial journey are you currently navigating? Are you fighting for identity? Seeking intimacy? Or maybe you're striving for generativity and leaving a legacy? Because the blueprint isn't just for children, it's the map of our entire lives. Keep learning, keep developing, and we will see you in the next explainer.